welcome. My name is Melanie Piro. I am the managing director at ADS Dental Transition, and it's my privilege to welcome all of you to So You Think You Can Afford to Retire. What I'll do now is I'm going to start the recording. All right, so welcome again. I'd like to introduce Christine Mason and Ted Schumann. They're going to give a little bit of information about themselves. And then we will, at the end, if you could hold your questions, they will give some time to answer those. And I will be monitoring the chat and Q&A section. So please feel free to put those in throughout the session. Christine and Ted, you're on.
Well, thank you, Melanie. I'd like to thank everybody who took some time out of their busy Thursday to spend some time on the webinar with us. My name is Ted Schumann. I am with ADS Transitions. I'm part of the Michigan member firm of ADS Transitions. And I have sort of an interesting background. I have sort of an interesting firm. I actually am not only part of our practice brokerage group, I'm managing partner of our practice brokerage group, but I am also managing partner of our wealth management line of business, which actually there's a lot of synergy and a lot of crossover for the two of those because of how big a decision and how much financial consequence there is for a doctor either buying or selling their practice. And so that's sort of the angle that I'm going to take today as we go through today's presentation. It's a matter of how the practice acquisition or how the practice sale should be viewed through a personal financial planning lens. I've been in this business for, I can't believe it, it's actually about 16 years at this point, second generation in the business. And it's something that keeps me pretty busy on a day-to-day basis, but is also something that I really enjoy doing, and I have a lot of great client relationships that sort of became friendships from it. And one of those is my esteemed colleague and newest member of the team, Dr. Christine Mason. Dr. Mason is a 1999 graduate of University of Michigan Dental School, which I'm told is a pretty good dental school, isn't it, Christine?
Yeah, that's what I hear.
I've known her for a long time. For part of her practice life, she was a partner in a very large group practice here in Michigan. Departed that and began working with us when she not only bought a practice that she decided she wanted to operate as a single solo, sort of operate on her own, but then after some years of operating a practice on her own, she most recently decided to sell that practice and pursue some other things. One of the things that I'm most proud she decided to pursue was a career with us in helping other doctors transition their practice.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to that, she does some very interesting work in the area of forensics. And Christine, you want to tell the group a little bit about that?
Sure. Thank you for having me. Like probably many of you, I'm working today too. So I cut out for lunch and I'm hiding in our storage room actually because everybody else is still working. So our lunch is at 1. So I had the opportunity. I had an excellent associate that worked with me for about 3 years, and she was really excited about pursuing her dream of owning a practice. I also had found a passion that I had been started pursuing right before the pandemic, and that's forensic dentistry. So I had the opportunity to do a fellowship, do some extensive training, and now part of my future in dentistry is mostly doing dental ID on bodies, if you will, that are unidentified either visually or through fingerprints. So we do the dental x-rays, we do the full exam, we chart, and we try to make sure that we match and identify that person so that their families can get closure and move on. So that's been very exciting. I'm pretty active with our Michigan Dental Association as well in organized dentistry. So those are some things I'm doing now.
Fantastic. So Christine, let's talk a little bit about your path, your journey, because a couple of interesting things happened in your world over the last few years. And let's talk about when you made the decision to leave group practice and buy your own practice, talk to me about some of the things that contributed to that decision in terms of why you wanted to go out on your own.
Oh, to do a solo practice?
Yep.
Yeah, so the group practice was a great experience. And there's definitely different dynamics when you have multiple partners making decisions. And one part of that was actually an opportunity a little closer to my home. And I found a practice that I felt could really be successful. And it was successful, but I was excited to bring in new technology and some of my previous training and had the opportunity to do that through the solo practice where I could focus strictly on what I want to do and take that practice in the direction that I was trained and looking forward to.
So you were able to seize an opportunity to practice on your own, have that 100% full autonomy, which doesn't always happen in a partnership dynamic.
No, it does not.
I operated that practice for some years, and then it almost seems like before we knew it, what had begun in terms of a relationship with you and I as a buyer's engagement, you and I, after some years, started having the discussion about potentially selling that practice. And
Selling.
can you tell me a little bit about what contributed to that side of the equation?
Sure. So, as far as clinical practice, I've been practicing 24 years, something like that. And I feel in my heart that the clinical side, I'm satisfied with what I've accomplished. I've done everything that I sought to do. I had a very successful solo practice to the point where I could use some help with that. And I was also running the business, which is another side of practice that we're not really trained for, but we learn as we go. And everything kind of came together with these other opportunities. And it was not a snap decision, it was a slow decision, but coming together both financially, both mentally, and what I'm going to do with myself after not being a practice owner. So I think it was kind of a perfect storm to target this and say, you know what, I'm ready to change from full-time clinical dentistry. And talking with my husband and my family as well.
It's funny. So often dentists will feel like the decision to sell the practice or retire from clinical dentistry is sort of predicated on some number of some kind. And,
Hmm.
and I've had
Yes.
that happen with a lot of clients over the course of time where they all have a magic number in their head. And that magic number can be a lot of things like, okay, I'm going to retire when I have a certain amount of money in my portfolio. Okay. Like there's a magic number in my mind. Maybe we spend a lot of time calculating it. Maybe it just seems like a big number that'll work for them. There's part art and part science to it, but um, sometimes doctors are ready to retire when they hit an accumulation number in their investment portfolio, or they hit a financial accumulation number. Sometimes it's a different number. Sometimes it's a number of candles on the birthday cake, right?
Yep.
Some doctors hold holy the age of 65, for example. Like, hey, once I hit 65, that's when I'm going to sell the practice. There's really no magic to it, but for some reason, that's a number that's been crystallized in their mind, and they feel like once they hit that number, it's a time to it's a time to retire. Some it's more of a lifestyle thing. Hey, I'm going to retire from practice. I'm going to sell the practice when the kids are a certain age, or when I've paid for the last wedding, or something like that. And once that date on the calendar hits, then that's sort of my time. But Christine, you said something very interesting, and what you said is that you made the decision when you feel like, or when you felt as though you had accomplished everything that you had set out to accomplish. And it wasn't as though you're retiring from owning a practice as much as you are retiring to this other pursuit, right?
Correct. That's correct.
Okay.
So certainly something to consider is when you are working 4 or 5 days a week steadily and you are a clinician, and if you choose to sell your practice, what will you do to fill that time? And how are you going to engage? How are you going to stay meaningful and relevant? And those are some questions you want to ask yourself and think about what will be meaningful for you.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, we're going to get into the mathematics of retirement here as we go a little bit further in this webinar, and we'll talk about portfolio stuff and Social Security and all that kind of thing. But in reality, you also have to give some very serious consideration to how your days are going to be filled.
Mhm.
Take a look at how many of your waking hours are spent at the dental practice, either practicing clinical dentistry or doing some of that after hours administration stuff. It's a
Yes.
full-time job and then some, right? It's almost two jobs in a lot of cases. In a lot of cases, this is a situation where doctors are going to get ready to sell the practice and unburden themselves from some stress. But by the
Yes.
same token, they're now also going to have more free time on their hands. And if they haven't thought about what to do with it, that can be sort of a scary and dangerous thing. You know, I'll talk to clients a lot, and they'll give me some sort of off the cuff answers, but sometimes I wonder if they've really thought about this sort of thing. Like, oh, hey Ted, I can't wait to be on the golf course every day. It's like, well, doc, 40 hours a week of golf is a job at that point, and I don't know that it's going to be as much fun as you think it will be.
Right.
Another conversation I have to have with clients sometimes is, they clients will tell me, oh my gosh, we have a growing family, we now have grandchildren, and my grandchildren are going to be enough to keep me busy. And there's a certain question that surrounds that, like, okay, I don't know if you necessarily remember how busy young families are, but entertaining Nana and Papa isn't necessarily what your grandchildren can be spending all their time doing. Or on the flip side, some of my clients, when they retired, had to have a serious discussion with their adult children that they weren't retiring to be a full-time childcare solution for that family either. So there's
Correct.
sort of both sides of that equation.
Correct.
So
And another aspect of this that I think was a concern for me was being a provider in my family, and we are a two-income family, but I'm no longer potentially bringing in any paycheck. And so I have to think about my lifestyle, what we choose to do with our money, and what does that income look like, short term, long term. How will I spend money or
yeah,
not?
it's a little bit of a different animal when you're not bringing a paycheck into the household every couple of weeks, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think, one of the takeaways from this part of the discussion is that there are a ton of software programs and spreadsheets and different exercises that you can go through in retirement to focus on how the money is going to be managed. But as important as that is how the time is going to be managed, right?
Yes. And
So
I think for dentists, just if you're transitioning out of a practice, or perhaps you would work part-time, there's still volunteer, there's still things like veteran services where you can still be engaged in clinical dentistry or dentistry itself. There's still a lot of opportunities that can be very meaningful. So it doesn't mean that you're out of dentistry by any means. If that's what you love, and you want to contribute in some way, there's a lot of opportunities.
So Christine, let's talk a little bit about the dollars and cents.
Hmm.
So you said something a few minutes ago that was very interesting, and that was you had to give serious thought to, hey, I'm part of a two-income household. The money I was making as a practice owner was significant. Um, when you decided to make the decision to sell, how much time did you spend sort of planning and preparing for what life without a paycheck might look like?
It's a significant amount of time. And part of that is even looking over years of spending, and looking at, just like a practice, what are my home fixed costs and what are my variable costs and things that I can opt out of or into. And I think when you sit down to do that, 3 months of data isn't going to do it. You need to be planning this much more ahead of time so that you have good numbers to rely on. And I also think when you think about your budget and you think about let's say post clinical work, you need to be honest with what you really are spending, and not necessarily that's not a bad thing. And I was thinking about, an example might be if you and your spouse are in a monthly wine club, and you spend $200 or $300 a month, or what number, if that's something that you love and you want to continue that, that needs to be taken into account. And just so, again, not right or wrong, but just being realistic about what you potentially will spend and how you will bring that money to the front to be able to spend it.
Absolutely. One of the things when I'm working with clients in the pre-retiree phase, we spend a lot of time working on budget, not necessarily to chisel expenses out of anybody's lifestyle, but Christine, to your point, to make sure that they have an accurate depiction of how much it costs them to live on, let's say, a month to month basis. And let
Mhm.
me tell you where a lot of clients really struggle with this is they maybe don't remember all of the money they take out of the dental practice in all of the different ways that they do it, right? If I ask
Sure.
a client how much their mortgage is, they'll pretty much know that. If I ask them how much their car payment is, they'll pretty much know that. If I ask them how much their utility bills and what they spend on groceries, they'll pretty much know those things. What they sometimes forget are the dollars they take out of the practice sort of indirectly. A lot of clients will meet with their CPA and the CPA will say, you know what you ought to do? You should buy your car through the practice and have your
Yes.
practice pay for the car because it's tax efficient to do so. Or you should put your spouse or your children on the payroll in the practice because it's tax efficient to do so. You
Hmm.
should, a lot of your travel is connected to continuing ed stuff where the practice is paying for it. And maybe, maybe that's not hitting doctor's personal checking account where it's a little bit more mysterious to know how much money is being spent on some of that travel type of thing, which they will hopefully continue to do in retirement because it's fun, but won't necessarily have a practice to write it off through anymore. And there are a lot of those sort of incidental types of expenses that the practice ends up paying for over a long period of time. Health insurance is another great example.
Yes.
Health insurance is likely paid through the practice. That'll be a personal expense upon retirement. And when I'm talking to clients about that kind of stuff, we sort of have to do the budget in two parts. We have to do, okay, how much money is spent in the house? And then what expenses does the practice normally pay for that are now
Hmm.
going to start to come out of personal resources, right? And
Yes.
and that's a very telling thing. That's one of the things. If you're in the pre-retirement phase, I would strongly encourage you, please heed your CPA's advice and do whatever they recommend as being tax efficient. But make sure you've got a little bit of scorecard that you're keeping on the side to know how many dollars you're taking out of the practice in every way, shape, or form. That's really the first step. Uh, which,
Hmm.
which which actually brings me to one of the things I think we had on the link to this webinar, and that is the myth that I still hear from time to time that for dentists, the sale of the practice will be enough to carry them through retirement. And it's something I still hear pretty frequently, but unfortunately it's something that needs to be debunked more often than
False.
not. Yeah, absolutely false. And Christine, I'm gonna maybe put you in the hot seat here. Back in the days when you owned your practice, you knew how many dollars you were taking out of it, even after we
Yes.
added back all that discretionary stuff, right?
Yes.
Okay. And
Yes.
you also knew how much you sold the practice for, didn't you?
Yes.
Okay. How many years could you have lived on what you sold the practice for if that was the only retirement resource that you had?
I wouldn't last real long.
Yeah. Okay. Uh, d- 2 years best case scenario. Maybe if you got a really great deal from in a really creative DSO sale or something like that, maybe closer to 2.5 to 3.
Yeah.
But one of the things that a lot of doctors tend to forget about when they get to that point in the sale process is the fact that not all of the money that they're going to get from selling the practice is going to land in their bank account or in their portfolio. And I,
Absolutely.
Christine, I think you and I have talked about this. It's almost like a little bit of lottery winner. It's almost like a little bit of lottery winner psychology, right? People always drive by billboards and they see what they would do if they won the $500 million Powerball lottery, completely forgetting that the IRS is going to take a big chunk of that money.
Yes.
And you have that happen with practice sales occasionally too.
Sure.
Doctors will sell a practice most of the time for cash, meaning that the buyer went to the bank and got a big pile of money and gave it to the seller. And the seller kind of has to calculate in their mind, okay, I'm getting this big pile of cash, but our friends at the Internal Revenue Service are going to get their fair share of it. I'm going to have some legal fees, and I'm going to have to pay
Yes.
the accountant to shut down the corporation and all that kind of stuff. And, oh, by the way, if I have any debt on the practice, I need to use these dollars to pay off that debt so that I could give clear title to the buyer at that same time. That
That,
big chunk of money that maybe you've been dreaming about getting for your practice when you sell it can really sort of whittle down by the time the taxes and the fees and any debt and all those sorts of things are paid. So that's why it's so important for dentists to be planning to self-fund their retirement and not rely on the sale of the practice to do so.
yes. And uh, being aware of all that ahead of time is critical. Just knowing that you will get, for example, through the sale of a practice, through the end, if you have legal fees, they will still, you're still going to get a bill for them later. So things will come in, and if you have recent equipment purchase that you have a lien on, that needs to be cleared. And it may not be a lot of dollars, but maybe your monthly payment isn't very high, but to clear that lien, that might be a little more significant amount of money, and that needs to be done prior to the sale. So that takes away from your net.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's why it's so important to build up your portfolio in whatever manner you're going to do it, whether it's stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs,
Mhm.
maybe you're involved in investment real estate or rental properties, that kind of stuff. Maybe I always joke, maybe you own a Jimmy John's franchise with your brother-in-law or something like that. Whatever it happens to be, make sure that you have financial resources, you have a portfolio of some cash generating power once you sell the dental practice. The dental practice, being self-employed, it's certainly different than being an employee of somebody else. There's a lot of people in this world who know exactly how much they're going to make every other Friday, and their life
Yes.
is very simple and easy to plan for, right? when
Yes.
when when you're a business owner, not so much.
No.
There's a lot more to it, and I know that you remember that way of life, Christine. It wasn't that long ago
Well,
for
I
you.
do. And just a quick thought there is some dentists practice such that they will take a regular paycheck, but some practitioners will also maybe take draws here or there. And so that needs to be accounted for too. If you rely on, oh, in the summertime, I'm going to take a vacation and I always take an extra draw. What happens next summer when you don't have access to that? This is just an example.
That's a great example, because you're absolutely right. A lot of practitioners will take some base amount of money out of the practice in some way, shape, or form, but they do a couple of big cases in a given month, and they take a little bit extra out, as they should. They
Sure,
worked hard
sure.
for that money, and that's why we own our own businesses, is to do that sort of thing. But we can't forget about those little bonuses that we pay ourselves, and the fact that there isn't going to be a practice to rely on to provide that anymore. So. One of the things that I talk to young dentists about when I'm working with them is like I said, how important it is to start building up your portfolio in whatever it's going to be. Like I said, I'm a stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs kind of guy. Like I said, other people like rental real estate and that kind of stuff, or they get into other businesses. Whatever it is, there's no right or wrong. There's pros and cons to all of the above. But one of the rules of thumb that I'll give clients that are actually sort of on the younger side of the world, that are maybe starting to get into their own practices or have just gotten into their own practices, is a rule of thumb in terms of what you need to be saving
Mhm.
on an annual basis compared to what you want to be spending later on. And if you do the math, you can sort of eyeball it as being a 50% factor. And
Mhm.
what I mean by that is that if you're going to start building your portfolio in your, let's say, your early 30s, let's say you're about 30 years old and you're going to work till you're 60 or 65, you typically need to be saving about 50% per year of what you expect your portfolio to generate for you when you're retired. So in other words, if you want to spend $100,000 every year in retirement, you need to be putting away in the conventional investment sense about $50,000 a year as a working person. And that seems like a lot of money, especially to young practitioners who are still fighting student loan debt in some cases, or are still paying
Yes.
off a practice loan or whatever. But that's actually how the math works in the accumulation phase. Now, in the distribution phase, it works a little bit different. And is it okay if I share a screen? I'm going to try to share something on my screen here to kind of illustrate what I mean. So bear with me as I'm hoping the technology is on my side. Okay, so let me see here. Okay, so does everybody have sort of a PDF looking document on the screen with a number of $3 million in boldface? Christine, can you give a thumbs up if you can see that?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So what this is this is actually this is a dummy financial plan that I put together just for illustration purposes. So just for this part of the presentation. And what we're looking at here is we're looking at someone who took my advice and began saving money early on in their career. And by the time they got ready to sell the practice, they had $3 million built up in their portfolio. Now, a lot of dentists fund retirement in a lot of different ways at different parts of their life. In a lot of cases, they'll have a little bit of money, they'll have a lot of money, I should say, built up in the pre-tax environment. So something they've done through the practice retirement plan, like a 401k, a simple IRA, some of those kinds of things where doctor got a tax deduction for the money he or she put in the account, which was great during their working years when they really needed that tax deduction because taxes are so high, and they still continue to be that high. But now they're in the distribution phase and money has to start coming out of the portfolio, and now we have to start paying tax on our withdrawals. In another scenario, or added on to that, I should say, some doctors also start building up a Roth sleeve in their portfolio. And most of us remember that Roth is money that we put into a portfolio. We don't get a tax deduction for the money growing in. It grows tax-free over time, just like our tax deductible investments do. But when we pull the money out in retirement, there's no tax due at that time. Now, in this particular case, and for example purposes, doctor has about $2 million built up in pre-tax investments. So like I said, those traditional IRAs, 401ks, simple IRAs, that kind of thing. Only about 300,000 in the Roth environment, because doctors can't fund as much into Roth money as a general rule as they can into the pre-tax investment. So they did the best they could, but they were only able to get about 300,000 built up in that scenario. And then what I would call an after-tax or a taxable account of $700,000. Now that could be just additional savings that doctor had done over the course of his or her career. Could be the proceeds from selling the practice after the taxes and all that were paid. Could be a combination of those things. Cool thing about the after-tax or the taxable account is that it's the most liquid and the most flexible. There aren't a lot of rules. There aren't a lot of rules attached to it. You can spend money at your leisure more or less any way you want. There's no penalty for taking money out of that part of the portfolio. Very flexible. So what we're looking at here is a doctor with $3 million built up with a little bit of money in each of those different sources. Okay. Now I want to show a couple of things to the group here. A $3 million portfolio will yield about $132,000 of spending every year from doctor 65 till 85 for themselves, and then age 90 if this is someone who's part of a married couple and they would have a surviving spouse. So the way that it works is that you start with this $3 million. Doctor takes $132,000 out every year to live on, and you'll notice that every year that number goes up a little bit because we have to fight that ugly inflation word, which we are also painfully aware of this year, right? So we have 3 million in our portfolio. That 3 million sort of hovers for the first couple of years because it stays invested, it stays in the market, continuing to earn at a reasonable rate of return. And doctor takes a little bit more out every year to fund spending needs for the household. Now, in this particular scenario, I've assumed that Doctor's spouse lived maybe 5 years longer than doctor did. If it's a male-female couple, women tend to live longer than men. That kind of stuff happens. Just because one of the spouses dies doesn't mean the other spouse necessarily doesn't need to be spending money anymore, right? They need to continue to pay the rest of their living expenses for the rest of their life. But I cut about 25% of what they need off of what they'll be taken out of the portfolio, because one person can live on less than two people. It doesn't necessarily cut in half. An electric bill is an electric bill, no matter how many people live in the house, right? But there is a little bit of reduction to what the spending needs are at that point in time. So I've done this math, and I've figured out a couple of things. The first thing is that there was an efficient way to take money out of this portfolio, and the efficient way to do it is typically this. You want to spend typically this taxable or after-tax money first. Reason being that any money we take out of this big IRA account that I have to pay tax on for any distribution that's taken out. So what I want to do is I want to avoid paying taxes for as long as I possibly can. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to spend money out of this after-tax account first and let this $2 million either continue to grow or stay intact for as long as possible. Okay. Now the second step is to actually go to this IRA and start pulling dollars out of it. And the reason we go there next is because this Roth IRA, I want to let that money grow, this $300,000 in the Roth environment, I want to let that money grow as long as I possibly can. If that money stays invested, it'll continue to earn market returns and it'll continue to grow. I want that money to get to be the biggest pile of tax-free money that it can possibly be, because we're going to spend it last and have to not pay any tax at all. Now, when you looked at how much money Doctor was able to spend out of the portfolio, some of the attendees on this meeting might have said, man, $132,000 isn't really that much money, right? That seems like for $3 million, I should be able to spend so much more, right? But what happens when you start to look at it is you go down and start to look at how much tax it takes to actually pay for that $132,000 distribution. Every time a distribution is taken out of the portfolio, especially out of the pre-tax part of the portfolio, that $2 million in the traditional IRA, they have to send Uncle Sam, let's say 20 to 24% of that money, meaning we have to pull that much more out of the portfolio just to be able to spend this $132,000. So from a tax mitigation perspective, it's important for doctors to be very tactical in terms of what money they're pulling out of what account and what the tax consequence for those withdrawals are going to be. In the real world, that's a very coordinated effort between a guy like me and Dr. CPA. Dr. CPA may tell them their first year of retirement, hey, doctor, good news. You just sold your practice. You got that $700,000 for it. Isn't that great? But doctor, this year you have no income on paper. So maybe you want to take some of the dollars that would otherwise be taxable out of that portfolio this year because it's going to be taxed at a very low rate. Maybe we fill up those bottom two tax brackets, take some money out of the portfolio when we can do so when the taxes are cheap, and get very tactical with it every year as we go. We see that happen with a lot of clients. So that's
Ted,
so, yes.
I would say to that is why, again, in terms of making this change and looking at your portfolio, it's not a one and done, as you said before. This takes lead in time and planning so that you have a strategy in place when you are going to pull from your funds.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And another good reminder is for those that don't retire in their 60s, but maybe retire in their 50s, some of the retirement plan money is going to be locked up. They can't get at it without a penalty. So we need to be building up a much bigger taxable portfolio, maybe in the last few years that we own the practice, so that we have some money to live on and bridge us between the time we retire and the time we turn 59 and a half or 60 for planning purposes, and we can get at the other money without penalty. That's
Yeah,
that is
excellent.
where that's where your financial planner can add a lot of value to your situation, because everybody's situation is different.
Yep.
While we're on this stuff, there's a couple other things I wanted to mention. The first one is when you're running analysis like this, you always want to make sure that you account for the random order of stock market returns. The best way to do that is with a statistical analysis called Monte Carlo simulation. Most financial planning software, whether it's professional like I would use, or maybe something the individual investor will use, will have Monte Carlo capability to it. And what it does is it randomizes the order of stock market returns to figure out how likely you are to actually be able to spend out of your portfolio what you're planning to spend. We all know if we've been investors in capital markets for any period of time at all, we know some years are better than others. We know on average we can get reasonable rates of return, but year by year, market could be up, could be down, could be sideways. Monte Carlo gives us perspective on the sequence of return risk that we have for our portfolio to say, hey, if this is how much you want to spend, is that something that's going to be sustainable regardless of the market environment? So always make sure you're looking at that kind of. Last thing, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Ted. Well, and to that end too, I think probably a lot of people that are listening to this webinar would be interested in the other aspect, and that is somewhat questionable. And I think you have a lot of information on this. Is how does Social Security come into this?
Sure, and I'm glad you brought that up. Let's go there now. So, Social Security, as most of us know, is sort of the retirement resource that we all have in common. It's the retirement resource that most of us are going to be entitled to because we've paid into the Social Security program basically any year that we had earned income, any year that we had earned income, any year that we worked a job in most cases. So a quick refresher for the group is that there's 3 magic ages for Social Security. If you're taking Social Security retirement benefits, there's 3 magic ages, and those would be the ages of 62, 67, and 70. Now, 67 is what the Social Security Administration deems everybody's full retirement age. It's sort of the baseline for how they calculate the benefits, and they do it like this. They take your highest 35 earning years, so that the highest 35 years you worked a job, you paid into the system, your employer paid into the system, or if you're self-employed, you got to pay both halves. Lucky you. And there's a record of that in the Social Security in the Social Security Administration. They take those 35 highest earning years, what was paid in on your behalf over those years, and they arrive at your full retirement benefit, or what you're entitled to when you turn 67 or 66 in some months, depending on what year you were born. Now, that's your baseline. If you want to take benefits earlier than that, you can take them at 62, but you're basically going to get about 2/3 of what you'd otherwise be entitled to if you take them early. So you're sort of penalized if you take benefits too early. And if you work and make any money, you actually have to pay some of your benefits back. So most people want to avoid doing that. Okay? On the other side of the coin, you can actually wait later than 67 to take Social Security benefits if you want to. And you get an 8% increase in your benefit for every year that you wait between your full retirement age of 67 and the age of 70. Now that's a pretty good deal if you can afford to wait. Okay? There's a lot of tactic that can be deployed when you're looking at claiming Social Security benefits. And for those of you that are part of a married couple, that's where most of the strategy comes in. And there's a couple of things that are going to drive the Social Security decision for a married couple in terms of who wants to take benefits and at what age. The first thing is, who has the higher benefit because they made more money over those 35 highest earning years? What is the life expectancy for both spouses? And then last but not least, is there an age disparity between both spouses? I have just a quick summary to show the group what I mean by that. And this one I put in PowerPoint, so I will show that to you right now. Is there a PowerPoint on the screen for everybody?
Yep.
All right, fantastic. So in this case, we have doctor that's 65 years old, spouse is the same age. but historically the doctor outearned the spouse. Doctor made about 200 grand a year, maybe spouse only made about 35,000 bucks. This is a very common scenario for what I see when doctor owns the practice and spouse works in the practice. Most of the time you would see a big disparity like this. Well, if they both took their Social Security benefits at the age of 62, over their respective lifetimes, they would only pull about $1.1 million back out of the Social Security system. Okay. And they paid a lot of money in over the years. So the name of the game is always get as much money out as you possibly can. If they both took benefits at their full retirement age, they'd get about 1.2 million. And if they both waited until they were 70, they would get about 1.3 million between both spouses and Social Security benefits over their lifetime. The optimal way for this couple to take Social Security benefits based on their age and the disparity in income and the disparity in Social Security benefits is actually for doctor to wait as long as possible. So for doctor to wait until age 70 to get the biggest benefit he or she possibly could, and have the spouse actually claim at 67. Just getting that tactical, just doing that, just using that little bit of strategy will actually increase what they get out of the Social Security Administration by almost $100,000 over their lifetime. That's a lot of money. If I can show you just one more difference, if I had that same couple, but a 10-year age disparity between the two, it would actually be more advantageous for the lower earning spouse to get their benefit, to file for benefits at age 62, have the higher earning spouse file for their higher benefits at 70, and that actually results in an over $200,000 bonus, for lack of a better word, out of the Social Security system. So there's a lot of strategy to this, and different situations or different strategies make sense for different situations. But that's those are some of the things that as you're planning your retirement, or you're in your pre-retirement or you're about to be retired phase of your career, this is some of the strategy that needs to be considered. So anyway, that's Social Security. I would highly encourage anybody, especially like I said, if you're part of a married couple, if there's a big age disparity between you and your spouse, there's a lot of strategy that can be taken advantage of, and you should be looking into what's going to make sense for your situation. So I think we're at about 12:45. Melanie, would we like to open the floor up for questions at this point in time?
Absolutely. Thanks. Great job.
Thank you.
So now if anybody is open, any questions? You all could put something in chat and I will monitor them.
Cool. So while we're talking about, while we're waiting for everybody to add their questions into the chat function, Christine, as someone who finally sold their practice or had to do a lot of soul searching to determine if and when, and then someone who finally sold her practice to an associate, you had a pretty ideal situation. You were able to sort of pick your buyer, for lack of a better word, because it's someone who you worked with for a while.
Correct.
Okay. What's one thing that you would want someone to know if they were going to retire from clinical dentistry and on to other pursuits? What's one piece of advice you would give somebody?
I would say that, well, of course, there's a lot of things that came to me as I went through this process, but one, being comfortable letting go of the control, the decision making, empowering someone else to let them pursue their dream, their goals, their activities, their way they want to take the practice. And it's hard because if you've been doing this for so many years and you're answering all the questions and making all the decisions, and when that's taken away from you, or a decision is made that you might have done something differently, it's okay. And but you have to tell yourself that it's okay. It's not my decision, and they're going to be successful and they're going to go their way, and that's okay. But that's a learning curve.
That's great. Thank you so much, Christine. And we are having some questions coming in. So first of all, yes, Cynthia, you can go back. The recording is being recorded. This webinar is being recorded and it will be sent out in about a week.
Okay.
And then we have another question. How does disability factor into Social Security or retirement planning?
Great question. And unfortunately, it seems like every year, every couple of years, I encounter a client who ends up in a disability situation, and it can be, it's heartbreaking. It's obviously a game changer from a financial planning standpoint, and it can take a toll on your psychology as well. So I wouldn't wish it on anybody. With that said, there's a couple of different ways disability factors into the equation. If you have private disability insurance, then your disability policy will typically pay to a given age. Most of the time that's 65, but you're going to have to consult your policy or consult with your agent, and they'll be able to tell you how long you're going to be able to collect benefits if you end up having to make a claim on your personal disability income policy. If we're talking about disability for Social Security purposes, what ends up happening is that when you hit Social Security age, your Social Security disability benefit just sort of toggles over into being your Social Security retirement benefit. And so then it's viewed just like Social Security retirement benefits would be had you gone to the Social Security office and filed at your age 67 or whatever.
Okay, Ted, we have another part to that. Are you still
okay.
able to pull Social Security?
I'm sorry?
The next part of this was, are you still able to pull Social Security?
If you're disabled? I don't know that I understand the question.
Cynthia, why don't you let us know that? Is it if you're disabled? We'll give her a moment. No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Okay. I think you might mean, is it possible if, let me answer what I think the question might be asking. And that is, if you file for Social Security, but decide later you don't want to, there are a couple of options for you to either discontinue receiving benefits or do a little bit of a do-over, take a little bit of a mulligan, if you will. And I would need to know a little bit more about the individual situation before I could give a lot of guidance on it. But there are some options to do that if you wake up one morning and realize that maybe you filed for Social Security benefits prematurely.
Ted, I'd like to add something. When you asked me about a takeaway for doctors out there that are considering creating a timeline for transitioning out of your practice, I would encourage you to not let your practice and yourself stagnate or go on autopilot. I would very much encourage you to keep your practice up to date, keep your technology, keep all of your treatment up to date, and still act as if you're growing the practice, because that's going to get you the best return on your practice. Someone excited to see growth and potential in a practice. So keep that in mind when you're in the 3 to 5 year mark, that's a really important aspect of a new buyer looking.
Absolutely. That's a great question. Or not a great question, but a great comment. The worst thing that a new buyer can see when they walk into a practice, Christine, to your point, is a practice that's eroding. You know, who would want to buy a business that's shrinking? Who would want to buy a business that's eroding? You want to buy a business if you're early in your career and you're going to borrow a ton of money, you know, even more than your student loans in a lot of cases, and you know,
Mm-hmm.
and be in a lot of debt, and really take the leap in your career and bet on yourself. The last thing you want to do for a lot of buyers is buy a practice that's shrinking or stagnating. You want to see that you're buying a practice that's growing and that you're going to be part of that growth long term. There are a few contrarian entrepreneurial buyers out there,
Yeah,
who think that, hey, if there's a practice on the decline, I can scoop it up for a discount price and you know and be better off for doing it. And hey, there's nothing wrong with that outlook either. But more often than not, buyers are going to want to practice that's in growth mode, not, that isn't necessarily plateaued or shrinking.
Sure.
And sellers are going to want that too, because typically a practice is worth more if there's been a growth trend over the last 3 to 5 years. That practice is going to be worth a little bit more in a selling price than a practice that's that we're only calculating a value on where the revenues have been declining. So something for doctors to keep in mind, selling doctors or potential selling doctors to keep in mind there as well. So great questions and great points all. Do we have any other questions in the chat, Melanie, that we need to address?
I don't have any further. Anyone else? Okay. Well then, if not, thank you very much, Christine and Ted. Awesome information. And as I said, round of applause, and the recording will be sent within a week, whether you registered and attended this live, or if you did not. Oh, we do have one more. Yay, one more question. Will the sale of the practice affect the Social Security?
So, will the sale of the practice affect Social Security? Great question, and it depends on if you're claiming benefits when you sell or not. So there's a couple of things to consider, and since we have a minute, I will maybe dig into this a little bit deeper. Sale of the practice will affect Social Security. Maybe a better way to say it is a sale of the practice will affect your Medicare premiums. When you have an extraordinary event in your life, or an extraordinary income event in your life, and you are on Medicare, that your Medicare premiums are going to be boosted up, because as far as Medicare is concerned, you now make more money and your Medicare premiums are predicated on your income. So that's if you're on Medicare and you sell your practice, be prepared for that to happen. Also interesting to remember how Social Security is taxed. Social Security retirement benefits are taxed to the extent that you have other income. If you are 67 years old, you can certainly claim Social Security benefits and work without penalty of any kind. Okay, the same is not true if you're 62. If you take the benefits early and you work, you're going to suffer for it. But if you take Social Security benefits at your full retirement age, you can continue to work, make your full-time income, no problem at all. However, Social Security benefits are taxable to the extent that you have other income. So if you have enough other income and it doesn't take much to get there, and you're claiming Social Security benefits, be prepared for your Social Security benefits to be as much as 85% taxable. Not the end of the world, still not a bad idea to do, but it's something that's going to change. It's going to change your Social Security tax situation. That's one of the reasons that a lot of folks like to fund Roth investment accounts. It's because they can pull money out of a Roth account when they're retired. It doesn't hit their tax return, and it keeps the tax on their Social Security benefits low. Doesn't necessarily work for everybody every year, but there are some opportunities, or some planning opportunities, to take advantage of that kind of thing if you have the means to build up a Roth part of your portfolio, or even an after-tax part of your portfolio. So I hope that answered the question.
We have more.
Oh,
so,
okay. Let's keep them going then. Okay.
All right. So, from Nancy, and thank you for these questions. Is it advantageous to keep on working practice one day a week after selling, from a financial and from a tax advantage?
Sure. Great question. Great question. From a tax standpoint, it really depends on how you're being compensated. If you're being compensated as a subcontractor, if the accountants are on board with that, there's obviously a little bit more tax strategy that you can deploy there. If you're being compensated as a W-2 for that one day a week you're working after the sale, if you're just going to be a normal employee like anybody else, not as much tax strategy to be captured there. And I would defer you to your dental CPA on that. As far as financially, is it advantageous? Christine, I think you could speak to this from the front lines. What do you
I
think?
can. I would say, what I'm doing now is working a couple days a week and enjoying that time. The nice part is that I can still do clinical dentistry and do kind of what I was trained to do. I'm still here engaged with the patients. This is a more personal side, I would say. I am getting a paycheck and I feel great about that. But I'm also still supporting the new dentist. I'm still here that the patients see that I'm around, it's consistent. And so that's something else to think about with the aspect of your practice. When you're ready to transition, do you want to stick around? Would that be advantageous for you and the new owner? Sometimes, and I've had this in a group practice where the person that has stepped aside kind of not that the person was bad, but that people would see him and only want to see him. Oh, he's back. Oh, I want to see him. But then that doctor's taking more vacations and not a consistent schedule. And so the business team is trying to work around all that. And it got to a point where that was not advantageous for the practice. And he understood that too. So if you want to have a little bit of income, that's one option, but you certainly want to discuss that at length with your new owner.
Thanks,
Yep.
Christine. We also have an add-on to that. Can you put 70 to 80% in goodwill when selling and then put a large portion in a cash balance account?
Ooh, great question, and one
Ooh.
of my favorite strategies of all time. Uh, I this doesn't always work because all the buyer and the seller circumstances have to line up correctly to do it. So I'm sorry, let me go back and explain what's being asked here. A cash balance plan is a retirement plan that runs alongside the 401k plan in the practice. So it's as though you have two retirement plans in the practice, which, as you would guess, having two retirement plans allows you to put more money in, more money in your portfolio between both retirement plans and take a tax deduction for it. Works out very, very well. Cash balance plans allow for higher levels of funding than 401k plans. For example, whereas a 401k plan might allow you to get 60, 80,000 into it per year, depending on how you set it up and whether or not you have a spouse on the payroll and all those sorts of things. A cash balance plan, you can get as much as $200,000 a year in tax deductible if you have the means to do it and if you have the profit in your practice to support it. And I could do a whole session on cash balance plans, but I'll spare you that for today. Well, the strategy that works well is if doctor knows he or she is at least 3 years from selling, they install a cash balance plan into the practice, fund it out of practice cash flow for a couple of years. So take that $100,000 or $200,000 that they're going to get into, that they're putting into it, park that in the cash balance plan for a couple of years leading up to retirement. So they need to make sure the practice is profitable enough to support that. And then the year of sale, we use some of the sale proceeds to make a big cash balance plan contribution to offset some of the tax on the sale of the practice. When it works beautifully, but all of the variables have to integrate in order for it to work well. Where have I seen it work the best? When doctor is selling to a longtime associate, or it's a group practice where one of the senior partners is selling to one of the junior partners, or when mom or dad is selling to son or daughter. So when we can get everybody on board to make the plan work, it works perfectly. But all the conditions have to be right. Hope that answered the question.
All right. Well, I think that is it.
Cool.
Awesome.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for spending the hour in the afternoon with us. And I'd also like to thank Christine for helping to share some of her stories from the front line. And if I can leave the group with a comment, it's that whether you're planning on selling your practice and getting that timeline arranged, or really any other financial planning for that matter, it's a dynamic process, and it's going to change as your circumstances change, and your plan has to be flexible enough to do so. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Melanie, for moderating.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Bye.